Hey everyone, my name is Anand and I'm a PM in the Windows Developer Platform, and I'm here to talk to you guys today about how to integrate Facebook features into your universal application through the Windows SDK for Facebook. So as an overview of the presentation, we'll start things off by talking about the SDK and the features it provides. Next, we'll go through an actual demo of how to integrate Facebook features into your universal app using the SDK. Finally, we'll go through some resources for which you can go to for further information and documentation. So the Windows SDK for Facebook is an open source SDK for integrating Facebook features into your universal application. It currently supports universal apps on desktop and mobile, written in XAML and C# or C++, and targeting Windows Phone 8.1, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10. The features of the SDK can be lumped into three major buckets: authorization, dialogues, and graph. Authorization represents the key component of Facebook integration, namely using Facebook login in your universal application. This feature set also includes logout, a XAML UI login button, and a profile picture control to retrieve the user's identity. Now the dialogues represent the three major dialogues in the SDK: feed, request, and send. The feed dialog, or share dialog, allows the developer to specify custom content that the user can then share to their friends on their timeline. The request dialog, for games, allows users to send requests to their friends to come play their game. And finally, the send dialog allows users to again share custom content, this time in a private message to any of their Facebook friends. Now the Graph API represents Facebook's Graph API and all endpoints associated with it. For more details on Facebook's Graph API, I encourage you to check out their developer documentation. Using our SDK, any and all Open Graph API endpoint is fully supported, and some examples include, but are not limited to, custom stories, uploading a photo, uploading a video, and many more. Now for existing apps using the Facebook.net SDK today, we would love for you to evaluate the new Windows SDK for Facebook for use in your app, as it is the official Microsoft-supported SDK for Facebook integration. Now in addition to these features, I would like to point out that a NuGet package release is coming very soon, which will allow developers to pull down the SDK quickly and easily, all within Visual Studio. Now we'll actually go through a demo of how to build an app with Facebook integration. We'll start by cloning the SDK directly from GitHub and referencing it within Visual Studio. We'll then go through the steps necessary to configure the app on the Facebook Developer Portal and jump back to Visual Studio and finish the configuration steps there. Then we'll go through and actually add the appropriate SDK features to the universal app, namely Facebook login, profile picture control using the feed dialog, and a Graph API request to retrieve the user's uploaded photos. Note that if you want to go through a detailed sample guide walkthrough on your own, check out the link here, aka.ms/WinSDKFB-sample. And now we'll actually jump right into the demo. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, there's a detailed sample walkthrough available at this URL. In this sample are text, code snippets, and screenshots from the Facebook Developer Portal and Facebook's page, so you can fully understand how to integrate the SDK into your universal application. For now, we'll get started on our demo from the GitHub repo. Now because our SDK is open source, you can easily download the zip or clone directly right from GitHub. Once you do that, jump into Visual Studio and right-click your solution. You can add an existing project, and since I've already downloaded the project to my desktop, I'll go ahead and navigate to the folder here. You can see under the WinSDKFB_UWP folder, there will be a VCX project that you can add to your solution as I have. Now once you've done that, right-click your project name and add a reference to WinSDKFB as I have already done. Now before we continue on in Visual Studio, I want to take a quick look at the Facebook Developer Portal so you can understand the configuration steps you need there. If you go to developers.facebook.com, you'll be greeted with a landing page like this. And once you sign in to your personal account in the upper right, it's very easy to scroll down and add a new app. Facebook will then prompt you to select a platform. For a universal application, select Website. Now at this point, Facebook will ask you to select a name for your app, as well as a category such as entertainment, games, fashion, etc. Since I've already created my app name, I'll just go ahead and jump to the app dashboard. And here you can see the Facebook developer portal for my app dashboard, UWP Social App. You can see some basic app information as well as some analytics, as well as an app ID that Facebook provides for you that we'll be using in just a minute within Visual Studio. Now there's a few things you have to configure here. Go to the Settings tab, and within Basic, click Add Platform and select Windows App. You can see it's grayed out for me because I've already selected it. Now, you will need to configure your Windows Store SID, and we'll find out how to retrieve that value from Visual Studio in just a minute. Now, if you're developing for Windows Phone, you will also need to configure your Windows Phone Store SID. For this demo, we won't be going through the steps necessary to configure your app for Windows Phone, but once again, all details on Windows Phone configuration with the SDK are available on our documentation page. Now, in addition to the Basic tab, go to the Advanced tab. Scroll down to the Client OAuth settings. Make sure Client OAuth, Web OAuth, and Embedded Browser OAuth login are all set to yes. You will also need to set a valid OAuth redirect URI here, as you can see. Now go ahead and hit Save Changes, and then you can jump back to Visual Studio, and now we'll figure out how to retrieve the Windows Store SID. So I'm going to go ahead and run the app. And as the app is running, you can note that I've already done a lot of the Facebook integration work in my UWP Social App solution. And most of the Facebook integration is actually present in this simple social service class, which we'll be going through. And now you can see that this is a fairly simple universal application with a responsive layout. And there's three main tabs that we'll be working with: the image gallery, social settings, and Facebook photo page. Social settings is where I've configured Facebook login. So let's get started there. Now you can see I've hit a breakpoint in the simple social service constructor. And that's because, if you remember, we still need to configure our Windows Store SID on the Facebook developer portal. To do that, as you can see on line 34, you just have to call the webauthbroker.getCurrentApplicationCallbackURI function. Once you have that, I've stored it in a variable called SID, and I just print that variable to the debug console. As you can see here, if I scroll down, here is the Windows Store SID. And once I have that value, I can just copy it, jump back to the Facebook developer portal, and within the Basic tab, print out the SID here and hit Save. Now we're pretty much done with what we need to configure on the Facebook developer portal, so let's move on to what we need to do within Visual Studio. Now I've set another breakpoint here in my initialize FB session function. I've set a session variable to fbSession.ActiveSession. This session variable will be what we use throughout the demo for a lot of the SDK functionality. Now you can notice on lines 50 and 51, I'm setting the FB app ID and the Win app ID of my session variable. The FB app ID is the Facebook app ID that Facebook provides when you set up your app on the developer portal. And the Win app ID is simply the Windows Store SID that we retrieved just a second ago. Once we have those two values, all we have to do now is configure the permissions we want to request from the user. Currently, we're requesting the user's public profile, the user friends, the user photos, and the published actions permissions is also needed to post to the user's timeline on their behalf. For more information on the full set of permissions you can request from a user, I encourage you to check out Facebook's developer documentation. For now, since we have the permissions we need, we can lump them into an FB permissions object, which is provided in the SDK. Now when I go ahead and hit continue, you can see that the social settings tab is fully loaded, and I have a login button that I've tied to my login to Facebook integration. Now when I hit this login button, you can see it jumps to a breakpoint in my login async function. To integrate Facebook login into your application, you just need to call the login async function as part of the session object and pass in the permissions you requested from earlier. Note that there's an optional parameter I have here for the session login behavior, and I've set it to WebView. For this demo, we'll be using the WebView login mechanism, but note that there are other methods of login such as WebAuthBroker or Web Account Provider for mobile. Now when I go ahead and hit continue, you can see that the WebView login interface has popped up, and it's asking me to log in to use my Facebook account with UWP Social App. So let me go ahead and log in to my test account's credentials. Now, I've quickly set a breakpoint here to show how to integrate profile picture control into your universal application. In my social settings page.xaml file, you can see I'm referencing the profile picture control object directly from WinSDK FB. And in the C# file, once the user has logged in, I'm setting the user ID property of that profile picture control to a function within the social service class called retrieve logged in user ID. Now this may seem like it's calling an entirely different function, but if we scroll down, we can see that within this class, the retrieve logged in user ID function is simply calling the session.user.id property of the session object. So in reality, all you need to do to retrieve the user's profile picture is set the user ID property of the profile picture control to the session.user.id property of the session object. And now when we go ahead and hit continue, you can see that the login was successful, my profile picture was retrieved, as well as a little welcome message to me. Now you can see here there's a little friends box that's empty. That's because in the background, I'm making a Graph API request to retrieve the user friends. But Facebook's Graph API will only show the list of friends that have also logged in to the same application as you. In this case, none of my friends have logged in to UWP Social App because it's a test app I'm using, so this friends box remains empty. And now that we've gone through Facebook login and profile picture control, let's figure out how to actually share to the user's timeline through the feed dialog. Now here in this image gallery tab, you can see a pivot control and a list view of the Windows Ninja Cat on the unicorn. But in the upper left of each of these images, you can see a little sharing icon. So let's see what happens when we click that. You can see I've set a breakpoint here in my post to feed async function. Sharing to the user's timeline using the SDK is as easy as calling the show feed dialog async function as part of the session object. You can also pass in a set of parameters to specify the caption, link, and description to go along with this post. So when I go ahead and hit continue here, you can see that within the app, the feed dialog has rendered successfully. And when I scroll down, you can see that the link I've chosen to pre-populate it with is from the Windows Dev Center. Note that Facebook will automatically pull the images from the link you specify. You can also see that the caption and description of the link are taken directly from the photo as I customly specified earlier. Now when I say something like hello from UWP Social App and post, I can quickly jump to my timeline to verify that the post was successful. And you can see that just now I was able to post from my UWP Social App. Now the last feature I want to talk about is how to make a Graph API request using our SDK. And to do that, I'll jump to the Facebook photo page. Now you can see I have a breakpoint here at the retrieve photos async function. For every Graph API request, you'll need three pieces of information: the path, the parameters, and the factory. The path is the actual Graph API endpoint you're hitting. In this case, /me/photos/uploaded. The parameters are a custom set of fields that you specify based on the Graph API endpoint to retrieve certain pieces of information to go along with that Graph API request. In this case, we're passing on the fields picture, link, and images to retrieve those values from Facebook's Graph API. Finally, a factory is a custom class that you as the developer create to handle the response coming back from Facebook. As you can see here, I have a custom photo class, and if I peek at the definition, you can see the string ID and string picture properties are customized based on the documentation Facebook has on user uploaded photos. Now that I've done that, I can combine these three pieces of information into an FB paginated array, as you can see on line 223. For every Graph API request made using our SDK, you'll either use an FB single value used to retrieve a single entity from Facebook, or in this case, since we're retrieving a list of values from Facebook, we want to use the FB paginated array. And once we've lumped those values into the photo array variable, all we have to do is call the first async function to actually make the Graph API request. Now when I hit continue here, you can see that the page is blank as the Graph API request is being made. But after a few seconds, we were able to retrieve 4 of my test accounts' uploaded photos successfully using the Graph API. And now that we're done with the demo, we'll go ahead and jump right back to the presentation. Now hopefully, the demo helped you understand how to actually integrate Facebook features into your universal app. We started off by cloning the SDK directly from GitHub and referencing it within Visual Studio. We then went through the steps necessary to configure the app both on the Facebook Developer Portal and within Visual Studio. Finally, we added the appropriate SDK features to the universal app, namely Facebook Login, Profile Picture Control, using the feed dialog, and using a Graph API request to retrieve the user's uploaded photos. Now to conclude, here are some resources for which you can go to for further information. Documentation is available at the URL listed above, as well as the full sample guide walkthrough that I referenced earlier. Since our SDK is open source, feel free to clone or download the repo from GitHub and play around with our sample apps in C# and C++. You can also send us your feedback and feature requests through the Issues tab, and definitely feel free to contribute using a pull request. Thank you, and I hope this presentation was informative about how to integrate Facebook features into your universal app through the Windows SDK for Facebook.